Hi, long range hunting. Today we're going to be talking about kill zones for hunting. Now, this is a long overdue video. Dawn, a subscriber, requested this video specifically. And this is actually something I get questions on a lot, so great suggestion, Dawn. And that has to do with vital size. Now, you can go read a million articles talking about vital size, how it affects the distance you can shoot, etc., the 10-inch pie plate. There's a couple reasons I don't really ever talk about it. I'm going to explain them, and hopefully this will help you. There's a difference between short end game and long game as far as, shooting. I hear a lot of guys preach if you want to find your effective range, shoot a 10-inch pie plate size of the vitals, and if you can put your rounds on there, that's where you should stop, is when you can't do that anymore. I don't actually agree with that. People tend to do generalizations. There's a difference between keeping it simple and not overcomplicating things and setting yourself up for failure. As far as the 10-inch plate, quite honestly, for the first part, the size of the target doesn't matter. The reason smaller targets are harder for people to hit is because they tend to not only target focus, but they forget to aim small, miss small. On a larger target, what they'll do is they will pick the center, they'll pick a specific spot, and because there's more target, they're just focused on that reticle like they should be. They're focused on that center spot with their reticle, and they press that trigger, and so they've got the focus correct on their reticle, and they're going for center aim, center impact. They're not target focusing. And so when they get smaller, what's happening is because it's smaller, they're trying to focus on it to get good aim points, but the problem is they're actually taking their focus off the reticle where it should be and putting it on the target, and they're getting movements. And then to top that off, unlike the large target where they're aiming small on that target, they're picking a spot. When it comes to the smaller targets, people subconsciously will end up just aiming at the whole target. There's a sniper analogy that's great. If you aim for a shirt, you could miss by a foot. If you aim for a button, you could miss by an inch. Aim small, miss small. And so people's real struggle isn't that it's not harder to hit. It's people mentally kind of check out. And so that's what shooting smaller targets actually does for you, is ultimately it forces you to focus on that reticle and still aim small, miss small. Now, the reason I don't teach that is it doesn't really matter the size of the target. When you got an elk out there in front of you, you don't have a 14 to 16 inch, target. You have an entire animal and you want to get point of aim, point of impact on that animal. And so that should be your focus. If I go to the range to train, it doesn't matter if it's 5 inches or 50 inches. I'm aiming for dead center. If I'm shooting that little plate, I'm aiming for the center of that plate. If I'm aiming for the big plate, I'm aiming for the center of that plate. If you take two targets, let's say you take a 10-inch target at a grand and a 30-inch target. You put 5 rounds center of the 10-inch and you put 5 rounds center of the bigger plate. Guess what? You've achieved the exact same thing. I don't focus on what size of target as far as, if it's 10, 15, 20, 50 inches. I really don't care. Point of aim, point of impact is what matters. Because again, an animal is not some perfect circle, just the same size as that. Guess what? Vitals, they're not circles. As you can see through these, they're not perfect circles. So going by that, it's this perfect circle, doesn't really work. And you've also got to focus into the size difference. Even the same animal, people don't take that into consideration. Let's take two of the most common animals. We'll take white-tailed deer and we'll take elk. Now, a white-tailed deer depending, if you go down south like Florida, Alabama and stuff, the deer look like dogs. We're just talking whitetails here. We're not talking blacktails or anything else. They are very small deer. Now, further you go north, if you get into like Montana, Idaho, any of those northern states where it gets really cold, you get up into Canada and they get much, much bigger. So those vital sizes are going to change. So, if you take a southern whitetail, a buck's vitals on a southern whitetail is about 8 inches. And going up north, you can go upwards of 12 inches on those vitals. But again, that's on a good side. That's on bucks. Does are significantly smaller, so you can even get a smaller cavity on a doe. So if you're going by that generalized and it's actually smaller, so that if you're holding that 10 inches, let's say you have all those hits on that 10-inch plate, you're holding, that group. Well, if you encounter a deer, like you shot a buck and it worked, but then you go to a doe that has smaller vitals, you could actually be outside of that quote unquote 10 inches you practice and end up wounding that animal. So it's one of those things. I don't really care about the whole 10 inches. Vital sizes change. It's not something that I really care to teach. As far as elk, let's go to those. And again, that's just staying with one type. Let's just go Rocky Mountain elk. On bulls, you're looking between 14 and 16 inches. And again, cows, it's going to be smaller. You have a smaller bodied animal. But then you throw in too, people don't realize there's multiple species of elk even. If you go with a Roosevelt elk are much larger in the body than a Rocky Mountain elk. Rocky Mountain elk have smaller bodies, larger racks, and it's reversed with a Roosevelt elk, which is a coastal elk. So simply basing it, elk is this. Well, if you talk about the difference between a Rocky Mountain and a Roosevelt, you're going to have a major difference in vital size. So it's one of those things that when you're dealing with distance, little things can matter. And so you need to take those into account. So you need to learn the anatomy of these animals and quit generalizing it, because ultimately it can set you up for failure. Quit focusing my range, I can't practice because my range only has 20-inch targets. Who cares? If you go down there to paint a circle inside. Figure out what your ultimate goal of accuracy is and place those rounds center. As long as you're placing within your accuracy spectrum of what you want and you're aiming dead center, good for you. Now, one of the other factors too is a lot of people don't think about vital placement is different. And so you need to know that anatomy. And again, that 10-inch plate or 14-inch plate or whatever you want to say it is can ultimately change. Let's look at a deer versus a hog. Now, for a deer, the vitals are under the leg and it's going to go back in behind the leg, and right around before the end of the rib cage, it's going to end up meeting the guts. It's a little bit forward of that, but that's your spectrum of those vitals. With a hog, those vitals are actually forward more. And so if you're going by your 10-inch plate and you place it behind the shoulder and you're on the right side of that, you are now gut shotting the animal. Now, let's say it has a 10-inch vital. Because your placement was wrong because you didn't understand anatomy, you have now wounded that animal instead of shifting it forward. Now, as we look at the anatomy of these animals, a lot of people don't realize that they think if they shoot where the leg, straight up from the leg, that they're going to hit the leg. There's actually that bend in the leg, and so you actually have a gap. So going straight up in the middle of that leg, no matter what those species, if it's hogs or if it's white-tailed deer, elk, all that, you're going to get a vital hit, and you're not hitting the leg. It bends forward. All, moose, all of them are like that. So if you're doing a high shoulder shot or you're just doing a quote-unquote behind the leg, I don't really like that as far as you're not really aiming behind the leg, but you can go dead with that leg and get in there. And again, it comes down to anatomy. But going by the behind the leg, this big of a plate, different species of animals are built differently. And so those vital shifts can end up costing you. You can end up thinking, hey, I got a great hit. Actually, no, you didn't. Bringing up hogs. Hogs are a great example of why you don't generalize. Now, depending on the hogs you're hunting, they can vary drastically in size and weight. I've killed hogs as small as 30 pounds clear up to 800 pounds. And the size difference of these things can be massive. I mean, you can get an adult hog that is this big, and then you can get a big old boy that's about this big. So going by generalizations, especially if you're at long range and you're looking at it, and it, you know, unless you know the distance and you put your reticle on there and you figure out how big it actually is, focusing on point of aim, point of impact is what you want to do. I mean, ultimately, this gun, when I was doing load development, had a vertical spread at 1,350 yards of 3.6 inches average. So shooting a 10-inch plate at that, which again I did, I shot bigger targets too at that distance, but even on a 10-inch plate, those groups averaged 3.6 inches. So let's say it did have a 10-inch vital area, all those rounds are going to be on target. And even, you know, the widest part of that group is going to be on that target. So as far as your group size, if your group size is getting too big, then sure, it can be off. And that's really a call for you. Quite honestly, if I'm holding, you know, larger than what I think the vitals are going to be, am I going to shoot? Really, no. But am I going to sit there and have a certain amount of target size limit me? No, because quite honestly, all animals are different. Even in the same species, there can be drastic changes in there. I'm going to go by the accuracy of my gun as far as what it's holding, myself, and, you know, again, my point of aim, point of impact. Because when I'm going out, generally speaking, my long range shots, I'm going for high shoulder. And so I'm not even looking for the entire vital size. I'm looking for that shoulder blade. And so I'm actually aiming for a much smaller target. And so if you're doing a high shoulder shot, or that's your goal, but you're practicing on a, you know, if you're going for an elk, let's say you're practicing a 15-inch target, well, guess what? That shoulder is smaller than 16 inches, and that's what you're going for. And so if you shift up and you've got that shoulder, well, guess what? That top part could be over. It could nick the spine and end up wounding it. You know, it's one of those things. Going by a certain size plate isn't necessarily beneficial. The vitals aren't round. In order to get a round spectrum, you're actually cutting some of it off. So if you're going to really go by size of vitals and, you know, that spectrum of it, do your research. Look up and study everything you can, especially the anatomy of the animal, so that you are making sure that you are inside of those vitals, getting that point of aim, point of impact, and that you're placing it in the right spot. Because again, like if a hog, with it being more forward, if you take a shot that would be good on a white-tailed deer, it could ultimately end up wounding that hog and not being a good shot. So everybody, I hope this has helped. Don, if you have any more questions, you know, shoot them to me. This is just my personal view on it based on, you know, my experience training and teaching. I don't agree with that whole philosophy of, you know, pie plates, or, you know, basing your distance off a certain size plate. Point of aim, point of impact is what kills. You know, accuracy is what kills, not what size of a target. You know, an elk's a hell of a lot bigger than 15 inches. So I need to be able to place that round exactly where it needs to be. Everybody be safe out there. Happy hunting. Not that hard, people.
Hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notification bell so you won't miss out on any future video. And happy hunting.